Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Julie Watkins, and I will be hosting today's travelogue brought to you by the Geographic Society of Chicago. Since 1898, the Geographic Society of Chicago has educated the public about geography and its important uses. Today's GSC trains students in the latest geospatial technology. Through services such as our community mapping projects, we offer unique educational experiences that harness the power of maps and the integrative tools of GIS to solve environmental and community issues. Together, our board and membership provide educational opportunities for students and educators, assist in building geographic materials collections in educational and cultural institutions, promote new and emerging technologies and problem solving, and much more. If you're familiar with our travelogue series, you know that prior to the pandemic, we would conduct these presentations in person each month at the Chicago Cultural Center. With the intention of keeping everyone safe and connected with our members and supporters, we have turned our travelogue series into webinars. Please make sure to share any feedback that you may have with us. Before introducing Derek, I have a quick note that some of you may be interested in. There will be an in-person event that the GSC is putting on for their annual meeting, and it's going to consist of the meeting and the brewery tour on Wednesday, August 10th from 12:45 to 4:30 p.m. We'll be going to Goose Island, Metropolitan, and Revolution Brewing. It'll be a fun educational experience, and transportation between breweries will be included along with beer tastings, tours, and Chicago-style pizza. For more information or to register, please go to the GSC website under events. And on to Derek. With us to present today is Derek Barthel. Derek holds a bachelor's in political science from DePaul University and a master's in geography and environmental studies from Northeastern Illinois University, where he studied the effects of tourism on patterns of deforestation in Colombia. He works for Here Technologies, sourcing geospatial data from third-party suppliers. In his spare time, he works as a political organizer and enjoys scuba diving, reading, and cooking, along with spending time with his wife, cat, and dog. So Derek presented with us a few months ago, and something to note that has happened since the last time that he presented is that he has been elected to the GSC board. So congratulations to you, Derek, and thanks for being here today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited about this presentation because this is, I think, my single favorite destination I've ever visited, or at least this particular trip is my single favorite trip. I've only been to Indonesia this one time, so I hesitate to say it's my favorite country. I need to go back and verify that. But this particular trip, I had a lot of good and interesting stuff that I experienced that I'm happy to share with you. First thing to note is this trip was taken before the pandemic. So some stuff might have changed over time. There might need to be a little bit of a different set of information regarding, I don't know, logistics, stuff like that. But generally speaking, Indonesia opened up for tourism in April 2022. So just a couple months back. And I know at first they had a lot of hurdles for tourists to jump through to enter the country, but I think a lot of that has sort of tapered off. And nowadays, don't quote me, and this could obviously change in either direction, but I'm pretty sure right now all you need is either a test or a vaccine card, but nothing too major. So getting into it. Today we're going to go over a little teeny bit, really disservice level history of Indonesia. It's not my area of expertise, but I like to include at least a slide on some basic history. Logistics of getting where I went, which include Bunaken Island, the Lembe Strait, the Minahasa Highlands, a little bit of Bali, and then on the way back I had a long layover in Taipei. And then, of course, we'll round it out with food and costs of all of these things, so you can get an idea of how this can be done if you're interested in emulating a version of this trip. You can see here on this map the two places in Indonesia where I focused the trip. The main destination was the one near the top right, outside of the city of Manado. There's these three general destinations that I went to: Bunaken Island, Lembeh Strait, and Minahasa Highlands. And then because I flew in and out of Bali, I ended up spending, I think, 3 days there, and had a lot of fun there too, although it was just a secondary destination for me in this trip. I think it's important to note this slide. Indonesia is enormous. I think it's generally true that in the US we tend to think lots of countries are small, but that's not true. This one is gigantic. You could see, if you remember where my circles were in the last slide, I basically flew into where sort of just about where Austin, Texas is here. And my domestic flight took me all the way to where Detroit is here. So it'd be like somebody coming to the US and spending half their time in Texas and the other half in Michigan. Really, really broad destinations. And again, I'm not a historian of Indonesia, so really don't want to cast myself as such with this slide, but just so we have some sort of general knowledge before diving in. There's evidence of people being there for, well, 2 million years. The Java Man fossil, I think, is one of the oldest fossils of this type ever discovered. There was a real golden age under the leadership of Gajah Mada in the 13th century. Later on in the 17th century, the Dutch happened upon the islands and did the whole colonization thing throughout much of the land. During World War II, there was a major Japanese occupation, and it was a big theater for war. We'll see a little bit of that in my slides. And then, of course, in 1949 was the nominal independence of Indonesia in the big wave of decolonization that sort of encompassed the globe as Europe was struggling to rebuild itself after the war. But we don't have to go into all that. We're going to have fun. All right, so my travel plans when I went here. Again, my major destination and the reason I flew halfway across the world was specifically for this little region called North Sulawesi. So the island of Sulawesi is that strange starfish-shaped island. North Sulawesi is the northernmost department on the island, a peninsula at the head of the starfish. The reason I picked it is because on the very tip of this peninsula, on the western side, there's excellent scuba diving on Bunaken Island. In the form of the sort of traditional tropical scuba diving that most people would associate with the sport. They're very famous for their coral walls with super abundant and colorful sea life. On the eastern side, there's a strait called the Lembeh Strait, and this is famous for muck diving, which is a very specific type of scuba diving that I'll talk a bit more about later. But it became my favorite sort of niche form of diving because of this trip. So it's really, really fun, and I'm glad to talk about it. And beyond that, in the Minahasa Highlands, or rather just in the mainland of North Sulawesi, I went to a couple national parks and did a summit of a nearby volcano and a couple other cultural things that we'll see along the way. And then once I went back to Bali, I sort of played the trip by ear. I didn't book anything in Bali. I just had the 3 days there near the tail end of the trip. I had originally planned to go into the interior of Bali to sort of the jungle highland area and maybe go hiking or otherwise engage in some cultural tourism. But because I hit it off so well with muck diving, I was happy to find out there's a corner of Bali that's famous for it as well. So we ended up just continuing on with the scuba diving portion of the trip. And then, of course, we flew EVA or EVA Air into Indonesia. At the time, on the way back, there's a 24-hour layover in Taipei, which I was very happy to take advantage of. Nowadays, that EVA air flight still operates, and there is still the 24-hour layover. However, Taiwan is not accepting tourists still. So I don't know how that works right now. If you have a 24-hour layover in Taipei, I don't think you're allowed to leave the airport. So I wouldn't recommend it at the moment. However, to fly into Bali, if I'm not mistaken, from Chicago, it's pretty easy to get there on Turkish, Etihad, Qatar Airlines, and at least maybe one more, Japan Airlines, I think. So as long as you time it right and don't fly through Japan, which is another one that still isn't allowing tourists in, you can have a pretty easy, well, I say that to get into Bali, it's pretty easy logistically, but then of course, I'll touch on this in just a moment. To get to North Sulawesi is a whole nother thing too. And then of course, as always, I eat lots of food because that's a big part of my plan whenever I'm going anywhere. So here's Sulawesi. I said starfish. It's sort of starfishy looking, I suppose. You can see the whole island on the left, and then here on the right, I zoomed into North Sulawesi. Manado is the major city. You can see the airport there. From the airport, we took a shuttle to the ferry dock, which is in that sort of bay there, just under the word Manado. And then from there, we took a little ferry to Bunaken, which is that little comma-shaped island off the coast. We dove with an outfit called Two Fish Divers. And Two Fish, as luck would have it, has locations on both Bunaken and Lembe. And if you book with them for both trips, you get a little discount, and they transport you from one to the other. So after Bunaken, we made our way back to Manado, took a shuttle across the mainland here. You can see that highway that sort of cuts in to Bitung. And then from Bitung, we took a little speedboat right across the strait onto Lembe Island, which is that other bigger comma-shaped island with the arrow pointing to it. And that's where our dive shop was located for our diving in that strait there. And then after that, we went to that green circle closest to the island is Tangkoko National Park. Then down up into Tomahone, which you can see labeled there, where we stayed and did some cultural exploration. And then the volcano that we summited is in that bigger circle all the way at the bottom. So just to give you a sense of where these things take place. Little bit of facts about North Sulawesi. The state itself has a population of about 4.3 million. It's heavily Protestant and Muslim. Indonesia, of course, is the most, I think, populated Muslim. It's the biggest Muslim country in the world, but there are pockets of it that aren't necessarily majority Muslim, two of which being North Sulawesi and Bali. So while I was in the most populated Muslim country in the world, I didn't actually encounter a lot of Muslim cultural sites. For example, this area is Protestant, I think largely because there's still a major Dutch influence. There's also a major Spanish influence because it's so close to the Philippines, and there was a lot of trade between Spanish-occupied Philippines and Dutch-occupied North Sulawesi. To the point where their local language, which is called Manado Malay, is a Creole language, and there's a lot of Spanish words in it. And some that I remember are like zapata, meaning shoes, or sombrero, meaning hat. Those words in Manado Malay are actually just the Spanish word. Geographically, the area is super rich in volcanoes, lakes, and then the coral reefs that surround it. And one major thing to notice, this is east of the Wallace Line. So if you're not familiar with the Wallace Line, I don't know what he would be, I guess a biologist. I think his name is Alfred Wallace. I think he was English. He did a lot of exploration here, sort of studying the wildlife throughout this region of the world. And he discovered that the islands have a stark divide of evolutionary class of different animals, especially primates. And east of this line, there's a totally different evolutionary lineage than there is west. And I think it's still largely unexplained why, because the line is a lot of the islands that are on either side of the line are actually pretty close to one another. But being east of the Wallace Line, a lot of the wildlife here shares more similar characteristics to animals found in New Guinea or Australia, whereas west of the line, which Bali is, you'll find primates and other animals that are more closely related evolutionarily to animals commonly found in Asia and Southeast Asia, of course, specifically. So I talked a bit about the logistics. It was a long flight to Taipei, and then I think the layover on the way there was only about 4 hours, and then a medium length flight to Bali. We actually spent the first night in Bali, and then took off on the very first plane the next morning to Manado, which had another layover. So from Chicago to Manado, it actually took about 52 hours to get there. Obviously, that included the stopover in Bali, where we went out to dinner and stayed in a hotel. So it was broken up nicely. But the fact is, getting to the principal destination of the trip took 52 hours. So I want to highlight up front this first meal we had once we were sort of like there, because it was it was incredible because we were starving and happy to be where we needed to be. Our driver picked us up from the airport to take us to the ferry port, and on the way we got a lunch at this little fish shack on the side of the road. There was a couple of big coolers of fish where you got to pick out whatever you wanted. We picked out a couple of those little silverfish in the middle, and they cooked it up for us, and it was absolutely incredible. This is a sort of a common sight when it comes to Indonesian food, which I'll touch on in more detail later, but it always has this sort of rice to tie everything together, different types of greens, sambal, which is the spicy sauce. Most of Indonesia calls it sambal, but actually up here it's called rica, R-I-C-A. The C in Indonesian is always pronounced ch, like C-H. So if you're familiar with Bali, for example, there's a famous beach, it's spelled C-A-N-G-G-U. And you'd be forgiven if you pronounced it Sangu or Kangu or something like that, but it's actually Changu. The C is always CH. Anyway, so rica is the hot sauce here, more commonly known as sambal throughout the archipelago. And then you got the yuca fries on the left, and then of course the fish that we picked out on the right. And the method here is basically sort of, you're largely using your hands. You would pick up some of the greens, make a little like rice and greens ball on the rice plate maybe, and then pull out some of the fish meat, maybe dip it in the sambal, and then mix it all together and eat it as just a big mishmash of everything that you see here, and it's very, very good. So onward a bit to the reason we were there, which is the scuba diving. Like I said, we stayed at a place called Two Fish. It is a dedicated dive lodge, dive resort. I wouldn't call it fancy resort. A lot of people conjure up ideas of super fancy place. It was pretty medium in its, I don't know, fanciness. You can see in the top left here, our room. It's just a fan room. There's no AC, jug of water, pretty standard bed. You can see on the bottom right here, the cabanas. We didn't get a private cabana like that. We opted for sort of the mid-tier private room. So our room is on the other side of the grounds, and it's in sort of like a townhome style building where there were about 6 rooms in a row. But food was all included. The diving, it was basically a package deal where you go there and you tell them how many days you want to stay, how many dives you want to do per day, and what sort of room you want. And then the food is always included in these things. There's a bar on site. Alcohol is extra. We can talk about that a bit more later. We opted to do, I think when we were in Bunaken, only 2 dives a day for 2 days straight, which, geez, in retrospect sounds like we should have stayed a lot longer because it was just so incredible. And if I do it all over again, I'm going to maximize that. This was our first diving trip in probably a year or 2. So we both wanted to sort of dip our toes in the water, so to speak. And we didn't want to just dive immediately. We just sort of wanted to relax. So we opted for 2 dives a day, which is standard, if not low, in these sort of situations. On the top right here, we're on the dive boat. This is at the surface interval between dives. You have to take about an hour on the surface so that your blood can sort of rid itself of the nitrogen that it built up on the dives. I'm not going to go too much into like detail with the science behind diving, but if you want to ask questions about it, if you're curious about scuba diving, I can answer them later. But this is just us on the surface interval. We're surrounded by a lot of islands in this sort of little teeny archipelago, and that's one of them straight ahead. That one was Maratua Island, I believe it was called. And these are some of the dive guides that are obviously just taking a nap between. So I mentioned Bunaken is very famous for its walls. These wall dives, basically, it's just it's what it sounds like. It's just a big wall of coral, and the ocean goes as deep, it goes to the center of the earth, basically. Just these huge walls. You'll never dive to the bottom of it because it's not safe, and eventually there's not anything there anyway. But I want to be clear that this photo and a couple of the other photos aren't mine. I don't really like dive photography, or doing it myself, I mean. Some of the pictures are mine, and you'll see, you'll know that they're mine because they're a very poor quality, because I don't like dive photography. But yeah, like I said, this is the best diving I've ever done. And I'm sorry to say, for anybody who's who really loves the Caribbean, maybe because of its proximity, it just blows the Caribbean out of the water. There's nothing in the Caribbean that compares to what I saw in Indonesia. Just in the 4 dives here, I saw white tip reef sharks, sea turtles all over the place, clownfish, like from Finding Nemo, candy crabs, which I think are super cool, and I have a picture of one coming up that's also not mine. And tons of pelagics, which basically means big stuff. So we saw things like tuna and barracuda and different types of sharks, again, sea turtles, things like that. This is not my picture. This is what it would typically look like if you're just out there. Like, it's this colorful and rich in life. This is that candy crab. And this thing's probably the size of your pinky nail. Just super teeny tiny, really difficult to spot, but once you do, it's fun to just, like, if you can get your buoyancy together, just sit there and watch it for a little while. And this will be a common theme later when I describe muck diving, but it's all about the macro stuff, which is the teeny tiny things that are literally the size of like a nickel. Really turned me into a macro diver. So we did that for 2 days, and then we did that transfer over to Two Fish Lembe. And here we are with this. Two Fish Lembe was another really nice little dive resort. The grounds here on the left, and the nice view of the volcanoes. And then this is just another shot of, I told you all the food is included. It's typically served buffet style at certain times of the day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner at dedicated times. There's like a 2 or 3 hour window where you can go and have as much as you'd like. And this will come in handy later, but note the picture of me with the beer. They don't mess around with little dinky bottles of beer. They got the big 750 milliliter, maybe it's not quite that big, but the big bottles of beer. So once you order one, you're really in for the long haul. But they're it's a standard lager, so it's like 4.5 or 5% or something. And it just tastes like, nice lager, crispy, like a Budweiser or whatever you want to expect. Okay, so a little bit about what muck diving is. So the picture on the left, you'll note, again, these volcanoes in the background. And this body of water here is a strait. I'm standing on the island of Lembe, and across, you can see, is the mainland of Sulawesi. Muck diving, when you, basically, it's sort of what it sounds like. You're diving in muck, which doesn't look all that great going in, but once you get down there, because the soil on the bottom of the sea is this super rich in nutrient volcanic discharge, it really supports a lot of abundant and peculiar and unique sea life that you don't find anywhere else, because this sort of environment is very rare across the world. And in fact, almost all muck diving takes place in this little corner here between Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. There's other little pockets like in Bali and a couple other islands in Indonesia. And there's actually one muck diving, or rather sort of macro spot in all places in Florida, outside of what's that town called? West Palm Beach, which we can talk about later if anybody wants to ask. But yeah, so you go down there. I got a picture of it later. It just looks like mud on the bottom, and you think you're in for a really boring and sort of gross dive. But then once you get down there, you'll find little critters, such as these listed here. And here's a nice picture for you. It's just mud, right? But once you get down there, you'll find, say, like a fan coral that has a very specific type of shrimp that only lives on that specific type of fan coral in this specific type of environment. Or another thing to see here is nudibranchs, which are little sea slugs that come in all shapes and sizes and all different colors, and some of them like glow in the dark or do strange things like that. Another site here that you can see in the night dive is an electric clam, which is this clam that looks like half clam, half soft coral or anemone. And in the dark, it has what looks like a band of lightning that shoots down its mouth, and it sort of glows in the dark. The peacock mantis shrimp is another one. That's the one that you might know it because it punches at the speed of sound, and it's really dangerous to actually take pictures of with your camera because they will punch your camera and destroy it. Blue-ringed octopus I saw, that's one of the most venomous species in all of the ocean. And then a lot of little super specific types of crabs, octopuses, shrimp, and all of these things. This is a nudibranch that I photographed myself. This is where we're getting into my photos now. So you can see the degradation of quality because I don't really know what I'm doing. And I just rented a camera from the dive shop. So this, which you can barely see in this photo, but I promise you it was spectacular in person, is that blue-ringed octopus. You can sort of see the blue rings on it. Those in real life were extremely vivid, bright, glowing blue, and they change shape and size constantly as you were observing the animal. And like I said, it's super duper venomous, but they're not aggressive. So as long as you sort of keep your distance and don't give it a reason to get angry, it's just going to be nice and bounce around. This thing I love because I have no idea what it is, and I've tried to Google it. They might have told me at the time what it was, but I don't remember. And it looks horrible and terrifying. If anybody here happens to know what it is, please let me know it in the chat. And this is a painted frogfish. These are this quickly became my favorite fish. These are little fish that walk across the ocean floor. They don't really swim around too often. You can see they're big. Their pectoral fins are actually little legs, and they sort of just walk across the ocean floor and sway with the current. And these things too are like the size of your thumbnail, and you can really just sit there and watch them for a few minutes, and it's really entertaining because they'll get picked up in a current and they'll get knocked on their side, and it'll take them a full minute or two to right themselves back up and continue on their way. So they're super clumsy and just really entertaining to watch. I actually ended up getting a tattoo of one of these because I had so much fun watching them over the course of this trip. This is a flying gurnard, which it's facing up in this photo. Its head is that sort of bulbous wide part in the middle. These sort of look like, if they didn't have the wings on them, they would look like pufferfish, like not puffed up pufferfish. But they had these super vivid wings on them, and then they also scuttle across the ocean floor with these long sort of like scorpion-like legs. Very, very strange and unusual. This is not my picture, but this was another favorite of mine, which was the bumblebee shrimp. Little shrimp that only live in a very specific type of coral in a very specific environment. And these two are, the size of again, like they could probably stand on a dime and have room left over. And this too is not my picture, but this is a mimic octopus. They're these super squirrely, long, slender octopuses that are just, I don't know, they move in a really unique and interesting way. And I saw one of them on this trip, and it was really incredible to see. This is my photo again, peacock mantis shrimp. extremely vivid and bright in person. Again, the camera, because I don't know what I'm doing, washed out a lot of the color, but bright green backs, bright blue eyeballs, and then bright red claws. And they live in sort of holes in the ground, and then they come up and crawl around in a kind of a creepy way. But they're, you can sort of tell when you're observing them that they're pretty intelligent actually, because they see you and they'll observe you and like know where you are at all times, and they'll crawl around, and they're actually curious, and they'll come up to you if you let them. And their eyeballs are they're one of those animals with like the way that they see is something that we couldn't even imagine, because they see in like, I don't know how to describe it, but like they see color spectrums that we don't even know how to imagine, or they see in just different, I don't know, ways. And in person, when you're looking at them, you can see on their eyeballs are just extremely complicated. You can see the eyeball here, but you can't really see it in the photo, but their eyeball looks like a million little eyeballs in one, because it's just like grooved and ridged, and there's lots of little crevices in the eyeball that, I don't know, make it look like you could tell they see a lot more than you might. Okay, so that was it with the muck diving portion on Lembe. We spent a couple days there, and then we hightailed it to the mainland for a few days. The first thing we did was this Tangkoko National Park, which is it's a coastal national park, like a lowland wet rainforest that leads into some pretty beautiful beaches. There's an abundance of wildlife here, including these bats that we found in a hollowed out tree and I took a picture of. This is that Alfred, I think it's Alfred. I hope it's Alfred, but his last name is definitely Wallace. This is that Wallace guy. There's a bust of him here, and then a little bio about him and how he was the one who sort of observed this line where the primates on one side of it are different than on the other. This is sort of what the trail looked like. We hired a guide to take us out. He was a birding and just general wildlife guide. And I took my camera there, so lots of wildlife photography. And the hiking wasn't too tough because it was lowland. A lot of it was just flat, but of course it was hot and humid. This is a tarsier, which this is one of the principal examples of like the difference between primates on one side versus the other. You wouldn't see anything like this west of the Wallace line. You'd see more, traditional sort of monkeys that folks here I think are generally more familiar with. But on this side, this is a nocturnal tarsier with these long slender fingers. They're nocturnal, which is the big eyes. This is actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the smallest primate in the world. There's also this pygmy monkey in the Amazon that might be the smallest primate, or maybe that's the smallest monkey and this is smaller and it's the smallest primate. But it's something like that, where it's one of the smallest or the smallest of one of those categories. These are nocturnal, of course, but our guide sort of caught a locust or something like that, and then toss it up towards the tree, and then the tarsier came out thinking he would get an easy meal, and he did. He caught it, and then I got this nice picture. These are couscous. It's another example. This is a marsupial. This is another example of east of the Wallace Line exclusive. These are sort of like east of the Wallace Line version of sloths, meet maybe like tree wallabies or something, because they are again, they're marsupials, like you would see in Australia. These are also nocturnal, and in fact, our guide said us seeing two in the daytime like this, and this is looking straight up into the canopy. He said us seeing two in the daytime like this is wildly rare, that normally they're sleeping during the day. And if one is out, there's not two of them, and especially not like, right there in the sunlight. So that was a lot of fun seeing these. You can see there's two of them here, obviously. There's one that's looking at the camera, and then the other one is up and to the left, and you can see its strange grippy tail. Which is another thing I think to note about the Wallace Line, because the primates west of it are typically tailless. It's New World monkeys that have tails. Like in Latin America and the jungles of the Amazon and Central America, you get the types of monkeys that use the tail as an appendage like the capuchin monkey from Ace Ventura 2, stuff like that, spider monkey. But in Asia, typically monkeys are tailless or otherwise don't have tails that they use as appendages. That is flip-flopped east of the Wallace line, and you can see here that this particular primate is using its tail. Here's another example of something we were super lucky to see, especially in the daytime, this owl. Our guide was freaking out because he said as I mentioned, he's a birding guide primarily, but we weren't there specifically birding. We were just on a standard sort of wildlife hike. And he was saying if we were dedicated birders and we saw this thing, we would be freaking out because seeing it in the daytime is ultra rare. Unfortunately, I don't remember the specific name of the owl, but I could probably look it up if somebody wants to know. Crazy huge spiders. Look at that thing. Okay, and then beyond Tangkoko National Park and the Minahasa Highlands, we did a few other things. We went on a sort of a cultural day trip that we booked through our hotel that we stayed at. And this is where we hit up a few different sites. One of them being these caves. These are called the Japanese caves, and why they're the Japanese caves is because when the Japanese took over this area during World War II, they put the local people to work to dig out these caves, which would be hidden from the view of the US bombers that were flying overhead looking for military sites to destroy. Local folks were basically enslaved or indentured at least to dig these caves out of the local mountains, and they would use these to store arms and to create military hospitals. Nothing remains in any of the caves that we saw, but we went into a couple of them and just walked around. They look largely like this. This is a typical site in the highlands. Again, lots of volcanoes, lots of farmland. This is a rice field. Super duper beautiful countryside. Like I said, volcanoes and lots of sort of hot springs and just like open air boiling mud pits and the like. So this is walking across basically hot highland volcanic hot spring sort of mud mix. And there's certain pools around here that you can jump in, like typical hot springs, hot water, and it's supposed to be rejuvenating to your skin and all of that. But there's other ones that are literally just boiling water that you don't want to fall in because you won't make it back out. Okay, I should have, hold on, let me go back. The next slide is a little graphic. So if you're squeamish when it comes to dead animals, don't look at it. Sorry for anybody who might be who witnessed that, but maybe close your eyes for the next 10 seconds and just listen. Another thing that this area is famous for, it's called the Extreme Market, the Tomahon Market, and 90% of it is what it looks like to the left. It's just your typical market, fruits, vegetables, and various other things, fish and meat of all types. But it's called the Extreme Market because this area is also famous for, they sort of don't discriminate when it comes to meat that they eat. And that includes bat and rat, as you can see here on the top and bottom respectively. And I didn't include a picture of this, so don't worry, but it also includes dog. So there is like the dog section of the market where you can buy a roasted dog. Obviously, well, I don't think it's obvious, I guess, but we did not partake in eating dog. I'm a pretty adventurous eater, but that's just not an experience I needed, so I didn't do it. Okay, anybody who wasn't looking can look back. We are off the dog topic. We're not onto a much prettier topic though, because there's also cockfighting in the area. This guy's showing off his prize rooster. There's no pictures of these guys fighting though, so don't worry. This guy too has another one. And on the left here is durian. Just another thing that's widely available in the area. If you're not familiar with durian, it's this very, very famous fruit that smells atrocious, but tastes good. So there'll be signs up in various places in this part of the world that say like, you're not allowed to bring durian on the bus or something like that because the smell is so repulsive. But it's one of those things that somehow, some way just happens to taste really good. So it becomes a food for a lot of folks. The volcano, we hiked to the top of a volcano. This hike was I want to say it was like 14 hours. It was a full day, and we started it at about midnight, so that we can get a lot of the lower land hiking out of the way before sunrise. I think that's right. It's been a while. We might have started at like 2 a.m. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But once the sun rose, you could see a lot more of your surroundings. It's very, very beautiful hike. At this point, we were like fording a little stream, using the stream as the trail, and then going up. And there's a lot of different landscapes that you visit in this hike because you're ascending pretty high in elevation. We started at sort of like lowland jungle, and then we went into a really, really beautiful and serene conifer forest, actually, that had this really beautiful mists going through it at the time. And then eventually you're up, like sort of past the tree line into the volcanic sand, which we'll see in a second. Another plant that was pretty abundant here that I think is endemic to this area, if I remember correctly, is this specific pitcher plant, which is a carnivorous plant. Of course, it's got a liquid inside of it that attracts flies and other insects, and they fall in to their doom and then are eventually digested into the plant. And then we got to the top of the volcano, and unfortunately it looked like this, so you can't win them all. You know, he said otherwise, it would have been a nice view, but we didn't catch one that day. Oh well. So that's it for Sulawesi, North Sulawesi. We flew back to Bali, another little layover in the southern end of Sulawesi, but we didn't even leave the airport. Flew into Denpasar, which is the major entry point in Bali. You can see circled in green on the bottom. That's where the airport is. And then we took a shuttle up and over to Ahmed. Like I said, we were both really into the muck diving thing, and then I was really happy to find out that Bali had it too. So we decided to do it all again. We stayed at, as luck would have it, Two Fish had a location here too. So we stayed at Two Fish again. And they gave us, of course, a little discount for remaining loyal. Bali, 4.2 million people. It's the only majority Hindu island in Indonesia. It's very, very heavily based in tourism and it's an economy. And this one is west of the Wallace Line. So I don't think we saw too much in the way of monkeys because we stayed on the coast the whole time, but this would have a more traditional monkey situation going on. This volcano you see in the background, actually, I forget the name of it, but it's the tallest point in Bali, and it's right behind the Two Fish Divers Ahmed that we were staying at. So this was sort of the view from the beach in front of our dive hotel. And normally we would have, you can summit this thing in a day trip. And normally we would have done that. However, we were there during rainy season and it was closed for the season. That's another thing I should mention is we were there in March, which is rainy season for a lot of the more popular areas of Indonesia, such as Bali. But in North Sulawesi, they don't fly by the same rules, and it was actually a great season for North Sulawesi. Think back to that original map I showed you of Indonesia and how huge it is. Obviously, it's not all going to follow the same weather or climate patterns. So there's always something to do in Indonesia. Really nice room. We actually got upgraded in the room because we sort of showed up last minute and they didn't have a cheaper room for us that we normally would have gotten. So they gave us, I think, the nicest room they had, but at the mid-tier rate because they were happy to have us. Beach view, as you can see on the top right. But the beach view is obstructed because the shack full of dive gear is right next to that, and that little like landing pad that you see right in front of our room was where a lot of people would take off their dive gear. So it wasn't exactly like a private beach view. Bottom left, you can see the pool, and then of course that volcano. And then on the bottom right here, we actually opted to get our nitrox certification, which is a one-day course, and that allows you the certification to dive with a different type of gas than regular air, which I won't go into here, but if anybody wants to know more about it, I can tell. But we got our certification there because it was pretty cheap to do so, and it just helps us out moving forward in the future. So we did some muck diving there for a few days. We also dove the Tulamben wreck, which is a World War II era wreck. I don't have any pictures of it, but it was absolutely teeming with marine life. Really, really incredible dive. But because it's Bali and because it's famous, it was also teeming with scuba divers. So while the diving, most of the rest of the trip was basically just us and our dive boat, maybe one other dive boat from another dive shop. The Tulamben one was just packed with scuba divers, and you get bubbles blown in your face and people coming up behind you and sneaking up on you and stuff. So it was a little different of a dive, even though it was obviously, like I said, really rich in marine life and spectacular. So that was it. This is the last thing we did on the way back to the airport. We stopped at this place called Tirtaganga, which is just this sort of cultural site with this waterworks situation and super duper touristy, as you can see. This isn't usually my sort of thing. And what I mean by that is like super touristy. Obviously, like the cultural aspect of it is interesting. But we just stopped because it was on the way back to the airport and we had some time. So we checked it out. All right, a little bit about food. I mentioned the food is typically some sort of fried or broiled protein, green, sambal, hot sauce, and rice. This is another example of that. Here's another example with chicken. And another example with chicken. And it was all pretty, really, really affordable and always really delicious. There's a big Chinese presence too, so you get a lot of Chinese restaurants. This is some sort of Chinese noodle dish that I probably remembered what it was called at the time, but I don't anymore. Okay, so last but not least, Taipei. We had a long layover in Taipei, an overnight layover. So we took as much advantage as we could. A little bit about Taipei, 2.6 million folks, settled in 1709. It's famous for the Taipei 101 building, which I think I have a picture of and you'll certainly recognize. This is a typical street. We landed there and we took the subway or I guess the train into town. Really easy process. We landed, I'm just gonna guess like 8 o'clock at night. So we were at our hostel by 9:30. And then we had that evening, and then the whole next day, I think our plane took off at about 9 p.m. You can see here on the left is our hostel. We just got a little private room at a backpacker hostel. The first thing we did when we landed was put our books down and we went out to a night market. This is the Ninchio night market. It's very, very famous for lots of street food, street drinks, and people just hanging out, eating and socializing. This is, I think, the relatively famous stinky tofu dish, which going into it, I thought it was going to be gross, but I wanted to try it. But it was actually amazing. It's just this. It's another one of these things that like smells bad, but once you eat it, like I can't explain it, but it's really good. And then we had bubble tea, which I'm sure everybody knows. Taiwan beer, which was a really nice crisp lager, as these things go. Next day, we woke up early and we hiked Elephant Mountain, which is just this high point in the city that you can hike up. A lot of people do it daily for exercise. We hiked to the top for the nice views. I don't remember exactly how long it took. It was pretty easy. It's steep, but it's short. If I remember correctly, it was like half an hour or 45 minutes. You get these nice views along the way. That's Taipei 101 on the left. And then we ate lunch. We went to this famous dumpling restaurant in the basement of Taipei 101. And this was the best dumplings I've ever had. And then we went to this Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. We don't have to go into who this guy is exactly, but he's a guy. He's pretty famous during the revolutionary era, like 1949-ish in China. He set up shop here in Taipei and they built this big old square for him. And you could see the square's cultural site. Lots of people take wedding photos. Well, I don't know if this is a wedding photo. She's holding a violin. So it's either a wedding photo and she wants to show off her violin, or it's a violin photo and she just happens to be dressed in white. I couldn't tell you. Here's me in front of the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. And then we weren't even hungry again, but we ate because we had to try hot pot. So another famous dish in this particular area is the hot pot, where they serve you the meat raw, and then you sort of you build your own sort of bowl around it, and then build it out yourself on the table. And this was also just a great experience. You get all the little like fixins, and you just customize it yourself there at the table. So that's basically it. To give you some idea about costs, airfare at the time, it's a lot more expensive right now. I can tell you that. Airfare at the time was $680 a person round trip to Bali. And then the domestic flights to Manado and back were about $180. Hotel, this was a little difficult to quantify because the dive lodges, again, it's like a package fee. So I don't know what, I couldn't tell you exactly what portion is the diving part versus the food part versus the room. But best I could figure, the hotel room ran about 35 to 45 a night in the dive lodge situations. And in Bali as well. It was a little more expensive in Taipei, even for that little dinky hostel room. I think that was like $100. And then this picture you see here was actually in Manado the night before our flight back to Bali. We stayed at sort of like a nicer, it was actually like a hotel and golf course. So it was a bit of a nicer place. We didn't golf or do anything besides eat at the restaurant. But this one, if I remember correctly, was only like $80. And this was like a fancy hotel. So pretty affordable. Dinners, depending on how low key you wanted to go, range anywhere from $3 to $10 for the food per person. Those big beers, and remember I noted that they were the big beers. It's not just a little bottle like a Coronita. It's a big bottle. We're only $150. So, you know, have fun with that. Our hiking guide was $80 a person for that, the day hiking up the volcano. I didn't mention this, but we got 2 massages in the trip. We got one in our room where the masseuse comes to you in Bunaken, and we got another one on Bali, which is sort of famous for like their spas and all that. The one where they came to our room was $9 a person for an hour for a 60-minute massage, which is nuts. The Bali one, where you go to the actual spa and you get to pick from a little like pamphlet which massage you want. That was only $25 a person for, and I think we did a 90-minute one that time with like scrub and all that stuff. So you can do that. The scuba, as best I could figure, again, with the trying to figure out the math behind the package, were about $35 a dive, which puts them on the cheap end of diving. Diving around the world, depending on where you are, can range from 30 or $35 a dive in cheaper places like Honduras or Egypt or Indonesia, to quite a bit more than that if you're in like Florida or the Bahamas, or a place where they can really ring you. We got that nitrox certification I mentioned, which took a day where we were studying. It included a couple dives, but it was $100 a person. And then a couple of times we had to hire the driver. I mentioned a shuttle, but that's kind of a misnomer, I guess, because it was just like a shuttle from the airport to the lodge or whatever. Those averaged out to be about $40 for, and I didn't mention this, but like the Bali one, from the airport to where we were in Bali, if I remember correctly, was like 2.5 or 3 hours. So it cost $40 for that taxi ride. Which, man, in retrospect, I really hope I tipped that guy. I don't remember. I'm sure I did. Okay, so total out of pocket was about $3 grand for the whole 2-week trip, which is more than we typically spend on a 2-week trip, but it included a lot of scuba diving, which is not a cheap hobby. Actually, and this might not be true because I say airfare from Chicago is $680, but I guarantee you I used points and probably paid half that, if not less. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. So Julie, if you want to move on to Q&A.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much, Derek. That was fantastic. We do have some questions here, and I want to encourage people, if you still have questions, to please go ahead and put them in. If the Q&A button is giving you any trouble, feel free to put them in the chat as well. The first question is, how much training is required to go on a diving trip like this? Do people often get the bends? As a non-scuba diver, I don't know what the bends are, but
I hope people don't get the bends often. If that is the case, something's seriously wrong. That's a very bad affliction. Okay, so I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but while also like answering the question in good enough detail. There's a couple different, there's three, I think three different globally recognized scuba certification organizations. By far the most popular is called PADI, P-A-D-I. These are the certifications I have. I don't remember what PADI stands for, P-A-D-I. And the very basic one that you need to scuba dive is called the PADI Open Water Certification. This typically takes about 4 days to complete. It includes theory up front. So yes, you'll be watching videos that tell you what and what not to do while you're diving. This is all before you even get in the water. You'll get what's called in a confined water situation, which is either going to be in a swimming pool or off of a beach, depending on where you're doing this. Where you'll practice some exercises, including obviously just like getting used to breathing, understanding how buoyancy works so that you're not like floating to the top or falling to the bottom, and doing other little like emergency type situations like taking off your mask underwater and then putting it back on and clearing it so that you can open your eyes again. Again, this takes 4 days, and I think you have to do 4 or 5 dives to accomplish it. And when you do those dives, you go underwater, you do some of these exercises you learn, and then when you're done with the exercises, you continue on with the rest of the dive until your dive master deems it done. That's the basics, and when you get that, you can go down to I think 60 feet. The next step, and this is what I have, is the advanced open water, and that's similar. It's 4 or 5 dives, and there's a few different like paths you can take at this point. But basically, what that certification will allow you to do is go down to 90 feet, and then typically it also allows you to dive at night, to do these night dives, which is something I did in Lembe, which I don't think I made clear. You don't have to get the advanced open water cert. You can dive for the rest of your life with the regular open water one and be perfectly content. But you do get a lot of it opens up a whole new world with the advanced, because you can go deeper into different dive sites that you wouldn't otherwise be allowed. The PADI open water certification, it depends where you get it, but if you got it in, say, Chicago, it might run you somewhere around $500 or $600 for everything, including the book, the materials, the expertise, and the training from the trainer. In a cheaper part of the world, such as Utila, Honduras, which is very famous for certification courses, because it's so cheap, this is only like $250, $280, maybe $300, so nearly half the price. There's also the pros and cons. If you get it done in Chicago, you got to do it in a pool. And then the only place to finish up the cert in the area is in Kankakee. There's a quarry down there, and it's really cold water. And there's nothing to see because it's all like, it's really like algae. It's filled with algae and it's green, and the only thing down there is bluegill. If you do it in the Caribbean or something, obviously while you're diving and doing these like exercise situations, you'll see stuff. Like I remember I saw, one of the first things I saw when I got underwater in my very first time was a stingray. Off in the distance. So there's pros and cons. A lot of people also say like do it in Chicago because you don't want to waste time on vacation learning or having to like do schoolwork basically. I don't necessarily buy that because I think it's still like all part of the experience, but different people have different opinions. As far as the bends go, no, please don't get the bends. There would have to be a really catastrophic situation for that to happen. It does happen, but it happens in situations where the diver is either being very careless, or the diver is brand new and they got themselves mixed up in a very careless dive master, dive guide situation. The only times I would say this is relatively common, and I do mean relatively because it's still not common. It's more common in situations where maybe somebody got their dive certification 10 or 20 years ago. They haven't really gone diving since. And then, hey, all of a sudden they're on a cruise. They find themselves on a cruise with the family, and they're in a day trip to Cozumel or some other island in the Caribbean, and they say, hey, today I'm going to go diving. It's their first time diving in 10 years. In those situations, you'll get it's a cruise, so it's packed full of people, and maybe there's 20 people on that dive, and the dive master can't monitor you all, and you're all sort of have this dive computer on, but you don't know how to read it right. So you stay down there too long, or you shoot up to the surface too fast, and then all of a sudden you get to the top and you're feeling real woozy and your limbs start burning, and you say, hey, these are my symptoms. And the guy says, oh my God, you've got the bends. We need to get you to the hospital. In those situations, you need to go into what's called a decompression chamber. And you have to sit in there for hours and hours at a time while your body sort of readjusts itself to what it should be. It's also very expensive. I know in Cozumel, for example, I don't know this from experience. I know this because I asked my dive guide when I was there. It's $800 an hour to sit in that thing. And the minimum you have to sit in it is 5 hours. So we're talking a few $1,000s of an expense. You really, really don't want to get the bends, not only because it's bad for your physical well-being, but it's bad for your wallet too.
Yeah. Yeah, that does not sound fun at all. Ooh. You mentioned night dives in your response. We have a question also asking about night dives. It says, did you do night dives on the wall or muck? If so, how did they compare to day dives?
So I did them in the muck in Indonesia here. I've also done them in the like more regular, I guess, coral situations. Not the wall here in Indonesia, but I've also done a night dives in Cozumel, Mexico, and in Nicaragua. So it's basically a whole different world down there, because all the fish that are super abundant during the day, they go to sleep, and all the stuff that is nocturnal comes out. So during the day, you might, just as an example, see a moray eel, and usually in the day, a moray eel is hanging out where 90% of its body is in a hole or under a rock or something, and you just see its head sticking out. Well, at night, morays hunt, so you'll see the whole moray out and slithering around looking for something to eat. Another easy example is lobsters. During the day, lobsters, they just like sit next to a rock and they're pretty chill. They're just standing there. At night, lobsters come out and they've got this whole like mating ritual dance where all their spikes and all their colors are popping, and they'll literally be bouncing back and forth doing a dance trying to attract a mate. And it's not something you'd associate with the lobster if you don't know that already. They're very, very flamboyant in the nighttime. And then, octopuses come out at night. They're a lot harder to spot during the day, typically. What else? In Lembe, we saw those electric clams that sort of glow in the dark. You'll see plankton, like the bioluminescent plankton. When I was in Nicaragua and we did the night dive, when we jumped in, we all met at the bottom, kneeled on the sand, and then we all turned off our flashlights and waited for our eyes to readjust, and all surrounding us was this bioluminescent plankton. So it was like diving through, like, if you're familiar with like the Matrix, when all those like numbers are flashing across the screen in the building, that sort of Matrix scroll, it looked like that, but underwater all around you. So stuff like that is, really prevalent at night, and you're just not going to get the same thing during the day. And then also, funny enough, the opposite is also can be interesting, where the stuff that's out there in the day, such as the sea turtles, they're swimming around and they're typically swimming away from you. At night, you can happen across a sleeping sea turtle that's just like perched on a bed of coral and laying there, and it's passed out, and you can really like check it out without it trying to get away.
That sounds really cute. Can you speak to the quality of the dive masters at Two Fish?
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I highly, highly recommend them. Top class in terms of safety, which is first and foremost the thing you always want to research when you're researching any dive shop that you want to go with. Beyond that also, and it is partly because it's this part of the world, And because the sea life is so abundant and so niche, these folks are just absolute masters at spotting all these weird little, I mentioned 10 times, all this stuff is like the size of your thumbnail. They spot it like nothing. They'll know exactly what type of coral it lives on. They'll go up to that coral and they'll find it and they'll point it out to you. A lot of the folks that I went on, that I was diving with, like the folks that I met at the dive shop, were photographers, and they relied heavily on the dive guides there because they were just pros at spotting. And you can give them sort of a wish list before the dive, like, hey, I'd really love to spot a hairy frogfish is one of them. And they'll say, okay, I'll try my best. And then you'll go down there and 10 minutes later, you're staring at the thing because they know exactly where to go and where to find it. So they can't be beat. In my experience, it's the best dive trip I've been on in those terms, certainly.
Awesome. Have you considered living abroad?
Yeah.
Or have you?
What's that?
Or have you?
Yeah, I have. This I don't know what angle this question is sort of asking or what context it's asking it in. I would love to live abroad. My wife and I have talked about, this doesn't have anything to do with scuba diving or Indonesia, but we've talked about Mexico City, we've talked about Bogota in Colombia. I have daydreamed about living in Manado in North Sulawesi here, because it is a big city with good infrastructure, while also being close to these dive sites. Obviously, though, it would require me getting a job where either I can work remotely in a time zone that isn't destroying my waking life, or otherwise getting a job locally, which I'm not sure is necessarily an option. But yeah, certainly considered it.
For sure. I just got a clarification on that question. The question was intended to say, would you live aboard dive boats?
Okay, yeah. Yes, I would. I haven't done that yet. And the major reason I haven't done it yet is because it's expensive. So I showed you the price tag of this trip. All told, considering how much we dove, that was pretty cheap. If you're going on a liveaboard, say in like Raja Ampat, which is another very, very famous dive area in Indonesia, that could easily be the price per person just for the dive boat. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're getting probably 4 dives a day, and it's all inclusive, and you're paying for a whole staff on that boat, so it's it shouldn't necessarily be cheap. It makes a lot of sense that it's expensive. Diet, and this is less of an impediment, but it's certainly, depending on where you're going, you also have to coordinate the trip where the liveaboard is leaving on a certain day. I sort of like to fly by the seat of my pants, where I get there and I go to the stationary dive lodge and I can just dive the next day, instead of being like, okay, when does the boat leave? When does it come back? How do I coordinate my flights? It just adds a little extra complexity in that regard. I almost did it when I dove Egypt last year, but I ended up not doing it. And then I've also considered it for Raja Ampat in Indonesia. And then one that I would really love to do is, it's called I think Jardines de la Reina in Cuba, which is a very famous dive site. And in the south of Cuba, that's supposed to be, I've heard, it's like the last bastion of Caribbean diving, what it was like before industrialization, because a lot of the Caribbean is overfished, over touristed, and not what it used to be. But and this is a fun fact, I guess Fidel Castro was an avid scuba diver, and he was quick upon a post-revolution to protect that marine sanctuary, the Jardines de la Reina. So it's been in its state without any sort of industrialization allowed to take place anywhere near it for a lot longer than a lot of these other dive sites in the Caribbean that are just now becoming protected or being rebuilt after cruise ships or overfishing or whatever destroyed them.
Another comment here says, really recommend Raja Ampat live aboard. So
Thank you. Yes, that's near the top of my list.
Our last question here asks a bit about expenses, but you went over that a bit. The second part of the question is, do you suggest a certain travel agency to help with planning?
I actually don't. I do all of this myself. I couldn't be more ignorant about like travel agencies. If you like, if you if you wanted to do like this trip in particular, a good place to start would be Two Fish because they're really used to questions like that and they're really good at like holding your hand. If I look back at my emails with Two Fish, I bet we went back and forth 40 or 50 times before I landed. Because I like, although I do it myself, I'm also meticulous and I make sure that all my I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So I asked them a lot of questions and knew exactly what I was getting myself into. Um, but no, I don't have any suggestions for like travel agencies specifically, like, you know, in the US that would do this for you.
For sure. All right, well, that will conclude our travelogue presentation for today. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Derek, for presenting. And thank you all for supporting the work of the Geographic Society of Chicago.